we are back again, and today I get to interview a colleague, not just a colleague, but a very distinguished colleague. He sort of was one of the precursors out there. I saw his stuff before I had any stuff of my own, and it's been sort of interesting to cultivate the colleague-ness. I don't even know if that's a real word, whatever it is. Joining me from bearingarms.com and Second Amendment Foundation, I'm joined now by Cam Edwards. Good afternoon, sir.
How you doing, Bill? Thanks so much for the invite.
Well, one thing and maybe you could help me out with this, because I do some fill-in work at a local conservative radio station here in town. And I find that just being a straight up conservative, it's a lot easier to it's a step down from being a Second Amendment advocate, because we have to deal in such a detailed world. Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, I have noticed that. And I started out in the world of conservative talk radio. And when I started working with Cam and Company back in 2004, I will never forget, like, we had the ability for people to write in and send us, we called them talkbacks. So you could send a message to me. And the very first message that I ever received on Cam and Company was from someone who described themselves as a lesbian in San Francisco. I can't actually use the terminology that she used, but she said, "I want you to remember that there are gun owners like me out there too." And I do remember that. So I think that, while most gun owners and most Second Amendment activists are conservative, we're not talking about a right of the right. We're talking about a right of the people to keep and bear arms that shall not be infringed. And I think that it certainly changed my perspective in terms of Second Amendment activism. I'm still a conservative personally, but I'm well aware of the fact that when we're talking about Second Amendment issues, we're not just speaking for those on the right side of the aisle.
Yes, sir. No doubt about it. Now, speaking of, one of the things that you did the other day, and I like the way you analyze things and break things down. I have not stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, nor do I play a lawyer on television, but I do try to understand things that are legal. My analytical skill is not quite up to par with yours. And you looked at what North Dakota's done, where they have declared themselves to be a Second Amendment sanctuary state, which is great, except it's just the problem is in their execution, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is not actually become law yet. This is passed out of the North Dakota House, and we're seeing similar language introduced in other states around the country. These are basically called Second Amendment Preservation Acts. So a little bit of a tweak to the sanctuary language, but basically the North Dakota legislation says that if a firearm, ammunition, or accessory is manufactured within the state of North Dakota, that the federal government has no say whatsoever in enforcing any laws that might govern firearms, ammunition, or accessories. It's more of a 10th Amendment argument than a Second Amendment argument, quite frankly. And the problem that I have in terms of practical impact for gun owners is that the courts have not looked kindly on these types of laws in the past. About a decade passed what was called the Firearms Freedom Act. It was never enforced. Gun owners actually tried to sue to start enforcing this law, and it did not go well in the courts. Kansas passed a similar piece of legislation a few years later, also called the Firearms Freedom Act. And there were a couple of Kansas residents who actually got busted by the feds for owning suppressors that were manufactured in Kansas. And the courts did not agree that Kansas had the right to circumvent or interpose itself between gun owners in the state and federal law. So it's good symbolism. But in terms of a practical impact, I think there are actually better ways to go.
So, and the thing with the practical impact now, I kind of think, given how I saw this movie called Miller's Crossing, where one of the guys is out there going, black is white, up is down. That's the way the Democrats are trying to characterize the world today. Mm-hmm. And you are proposing, or you're suggesting, that maybe they do something that the left has already done, sort of take that Alinsky rule book and slap them back in the face with it as you hand it back to them. And that has proven the test of courts in order to make this actually work and be practical.
Yeah, absolutely. California a few years ago passed a sanctuary state law, not when it comes to gun ownership, but when it comes to protecting illegal immigrants. And basically, they used as their basis for their law a Supreme Court decision called Prince versus United States. This goes back to the 1980s. Involves a challenge by Sheriff Jay Prince to the Brady Act and the original requirement that local law enforcement and state law enforcement were going to have to conduct these background checks. And Sheriff Prince said, no, this is a federal law. I should not have to be required to enforce it. And ultimately, the Supreme Court agreed. And the standard that the Supreme Court set down was that local and state law enforcement cannot interfere with federal law enforcement, but they don't have to conduct the duties of federal law enforcement either. And so California, going back to the law that they put in place regarding illegal immigration, their law says that the state is not going to lift a finger to help ICE when it comes to apprehending illegal immigrants. They're not going to go out of their way to inform ICE that illegal immigrants are being released from a jail. In other words, if the federal government wants to enforce its law, it can, but state and local governments aren't going to do anything to help. The Supreme Court, that law was challenged. The Ninth Circuit upheld the law. The Supreme Court declined to review that law. So that's good law as it stands right now. And there's no reason why that legislation could not be adapted to apply to federal gun control laws as well.
Would this be like a form of nullification or just a parry to what the federal government is trying to do?
Yeah, it's not nullification because, again, the Supreme Court has said you can't interfere with federal law enforcement, but you don't have to help. And so, is this a perfect solution? No, it's not. You compare to the Second Amendment Preservation Acts, it does not go as far, right? The Second Amendment Preservation Act state, Missouri, the law that they're considering says that federal law enforcement can be arrested if they try to enforce federal gun control laws in the state. And it sounds good. It's real red meat. But if it's going to get tossed out in court, then it absolutely does nothing for gun owners. So, maybe it's just the fact that I'm a small C conservative, but I would rather take steps that I know can work, that even if they don't provide as much security in theory to gun owners, I think that they provide more security than the Second Amendment Preservation Acts in practice.
Well, one of the things I see whenever we as conservatives try to do something in the courts, we seem to not dot the I's and cross all the T's. And the left seems to be really adept at going in there and going through that serpentine maze that is created that they suss out. We're out there going, well, we sure showed them, didn't we? Except we didn't. And they figure out a way to get around that. And what you're suggesting is a way to close that maze down and actually make it more solid as far as a piece of legislation.
Absolutely. And so, again, I mean, if let's say a state passed a Second Amendment sanctuary bill that was modeled after California's illegal immigration model, if Biden's gun ban were to pass, local sheriffs, state police could absolutely say, nope, we're not going to enforce this law. Bring in the FBI, bring in the ATF, bring in the DEA or whatever other federal agency. But you guys are going to be the ones enforcing this law. We're not going to arrest any residents just because they might happen to possess an AR-15 and you say they can't. That would absolutely be allowed. And I think that would withstand legal scrutiny. So is it a perfect solution? No, but we don't live in a perfect world. And we have to go, I think, with what will work and what will withstand court challenges. You're right. We've got to dot our I's. We've got to cross our T's. Even if it doesn't get us as far as we would like to go, it at least moves us in the right direction as opposed to trying to take, this giant leap forward that's just going to get smacked down by the courts anyway.
Yeah. But here's the question. And I often wonder about this. I've always thought that politicians are only as good as their staffs. And some of these politicians, their staffs seem to be like kids, and they don't really have that depth of critical thinking to get out there and make these calls because, like with the ascendance of Trump, one of the reasons that Trump got as far as he did is he didn't sound like the rest of them. Everybody else, the 17 or 18, they all sounded the same. And these guys exist in this consultant population where they're constantly consulting people. I mean, just look at Nikki Haley. She consulted somebody and look what's happened to her. And how do we get past that? How do we give them something to work with that's actually solid to where they can make a hard, concrete piece of legislation out of it?
I think it's going to involve talking with these lawmakers. And this is something that individual gun owners can do. You don't have to rely on a Second Amendment organization to lobby these lawmakers. Reach out to your state representative and ask them, if they're pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, ask them to consider something like this. Point them to California's model. But we've got to start, we have to present these ideas. Because I think, these lawmakers who I think, again, have the best of intentions here in protecting our Second Amendment rights, it may be that they're getting bad advice in some circumstances. It may be that they're more interested in pushing the envelope and let's go ahead and challenge this in court and see if we can get, a good decision from this, supposedly conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And I understand that. There are also things that you can do. Missouri's Second Amendment Preservation Ordinance has what's called a severability clause, which means that if it's challenged in court and one part is thrown out, the other parts of the legislation would remain. So that's I think an idea that could work. If you really want to make that 10th Amendment challenge, go ahead, but include that severability clause so that if the 10th Amendment aspect of the law gets struck down, that you still have a California-style sanctuary law in place as a backup.
We're going to take a quick break and everything. When we get back, you can find all of this, first of all, at bearingarms.com, which has become quite the multimedia outlet for gun owners and Second Amendment advocates. They have both, of course, the written word and the blog and the personage of Cam himself, Tom Knighton, and a few other writers that are there. And Cam and Company has moved there. So check that out. And of course, Second Amendment Foundation, saf.org. We'll be right back. This is Lock and Load.
The largest small arms factory in the world, CZ Products, had become legendary. From the iconic CZ75 to modern favorites like the Scorpion and P10, CZ firearms are known for their quality, accuracy, and reliability without breaking the bank. CZ, for those
family owned and operated for more than 40 years, DeSantis has become the choice of elite U.S. law enforcement and the U.S. military. DeSantis uses skilled craftspeople to construct their holsters by hand, right here in the United States. To see DeSantis holsters in action, watch Personal Defense World's Everyday Carry video series at personaldefenseworld.com.